Rand wakes up and he's like pinned up on a thing in
Very,
front of
yeah, Christ-like.
Lanfear. Yeah, in front of Lanfear, who's on this like crazy looking throne, and they're in the middle of a desert atop of these mountaintops. She's wearing this insane dress.
Yeah, it's awesome.
She looks so fucking cool, and she's like talking to him, and like his whole thing from Moraine, it's like, don't listen to her. She's, gonna mess with your mind and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm gonna listen to anything this woman's saying to me right now. Like, all my defenses are gone. I'm just like, holy shit.
Welcome, friends, to episode 287 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss the second half of season 2 of Rafe Judkins' TV series, The Wheel of Time. All right, so here we are. We're wrapping up our coverage from book 2 and season 2 of The Wheel of Time. And, season 1 left us with some wants and some hope for the future. And now we're done with season 2. How are you feeling about this, Luke?
I am overall happier than I was at the end of season 1. Sure, the show continues to have some stuff that makes me raise my eyebrows. Some wonky stuff every now and then. Every now and then can get a little cheesy. But overall, I think this is the right direction. It's an improvement. A lot of things are coming together for me. I like some of the changes they've even made to the storylines. Not necessarily all of them, but overall, I'm feeling more optimistic about Wheel of Time going forward after this season, and I'm happier with what was on screen. This is still a big fantasy, and when I mean fantasy, I mean like high fantasy, like tons of magic, lots of effects. This is the kind of stuff that people who, got into Game of Thrones who weren't fantasy fans, I think this is what they were a little bit worried about. I don't know if it's ever going to appeal to those people, right? The people who are like fantasy curious, but not willing to commit to the big fantasy stuff. This is always going to be, I think, more for people who are like, no, I just love fantasy and I don't care. And I fall in that crowd, so I'm enjoying it with a few reservations. Where are you at?
I'm in the same boat, right? Season 1 had some things that we enjoyed, and then the end, I feel like they really didn't do themselves a lot of favors, especially moving into a season 2 and continuing Robert Jordan's source material. But here I am feeling like, through all the changes, through all the stuff that's going on, this is one of my favorite fantasy shows on TV, and I know that that's because there's not a ton of high fantasy on TV, but I'm enjoying the hell out of it. And I think there are some specific bright spots in this show that you're like, when it's doing what it does well, it blows you away. You're like, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted out of Robert Jordan's work. And then there's just some question marks that you don't understand why they do the things that they do. And maybe they'll pay off in a satisfying way. But ultimately, they take the good with the bad. I'm really like happy with the show. I want to see more of it. And yeah, speaking of bright spots, just like some of these young performers that were unknown that they found are really carrying their weight alongside people like, Rosamund Pike as Moiraine. Mm-hmm. And this it took me on some twists and turns, and I was curious because I've only read 2 books, how much we would get into book 3, and I feel like with some outside research that I've seen, we basically jumped all the way through book 3 in there somewhere as well, or a lot of the plot points happened.
Let's talk about it since you mentioned it here. Rafe Judkins has confirmed this. He tweeted about it. He talked to Decider about it. I read an article. He basically said that book 3 and book 2 to him had very similar plots, and there's some development that happens in book 3, it sounds like, but other than that, like, it was kind of the same plot twice in a row with some different change. I don't know. It's been a while since I've read book 3, so I would need to read it again to confirm that for myself. But because of that, he wanted to get into book 4 for season 3. In order to do that, he needed to make sure everybody was ready for a lot of the stuff that's going to be in book 4, The Shadow Rising, which I think is a lot of people's favorite book. I know it's up there for me. It's been a while again since I've read the series. I remember being really fond of that one.
That's awesome.
And we're prepping for that, it feels like. And because of that, like, yes, stuff still feels rushed to me.
That was going to be a big point for me is it does feel like we're flying by major moments, and specifically too, like, just the moments that let you live with the characters and live in the world a little bit, because it's so breakneck. And I think I've caught on to this more as I've read more of Jordan's work. and I'm seeing how the pacing of the show, I'm definitely starting to pick up on like, oh man, we're flying through this, and I know it's because they wanted to get into the meat of it because
Yeah.
that's what kind of makes this world unique.
And you're going to have to continue to do that and keep the pace high if you know if you set yourself up for success and say this is as popular and as successful a show as we ever could have dreamed. You're probably still going to only have 8 or 9 seasons at most before everybody's kind of aged out of their roles and it's just taking too long. And in that ideal scenario, you want to be wrapping up the final book by that season, which means you're going to have to start tackling 2 of these massive tomes a season approximately. And honestly, even at the pace we're moving right now, it's going to be tough to get there. I haven't done a whole series analysis to figure out if there's other spots where you can jam some stuff together. I know there's kind of a slog in the middle books that people talk about. I assume that means that there's some of that stuff that can get condensed. But that's all a challenge for Rafe Judkins, and I see him working towards that. And some of that is leading to, I think, some frustrations in like book purists. But yeah, I think just what he's doing right now in this current season was more in line with what I would have wanted and expected than, like, say, the first season, where there were some outside things going on, obviously, that exacerbated problems, but it just wasn't handled as elegantly as I think he did here.
This was ramping up, and I think season 1 did this as well. Like each episode I was enjoying more, I was getting more invested. They were doing bigger effects, like larger showcases of what this world is going to be like. And getting here to the end, it did that again. Felt like episodes were getting better and better and better. And then nearing the end here, we can get into some of the specifics, but it did feel like they took kind of and maybe this has to do with jamming those books together, but it felt like very clean and organized, and it came together very neatly in a way I didn't expect because it's unlike the book, at least in The Great Hunt. The final episode or 2 left me wanting a little bit more, but overall, and I think that comes down to my imagination of what this book could have been
Yeah.
nearing the end. But for what it is, high fantasy show on an Amazon budget, I'm pretty blown away. And all I want is to get more now. I'm like, give me season 3. I want to read book 3. I want to read book 4. I'm ready. Let's
Yeah.
jump into some more.
I think we'll have to do a book 3 in 2024, just as kind of a standalone coverage. That way we're ready for season 3 in 2025, which seems the likely release date. And that point we would read a book 4. I think there's a lot of great newcomers that I want to highlight here in this season. We got Elaine Tricon for the first time, portrayed by Sierra Coveney. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the first name, but I thought she was good. She's a major character going forward. I don't think it's a spoiler to say. I like to see her getting involved in things here early. You've touched on, even in our coverage of The Great Hunt, how it still kind of feels like the Rand show. And it takes a little while in these early books for Robert Jordan to truly embrace this big ensemble cast and start to make it feel like it's a shared story and not as much like Rand's story with some other people who are also in it, which it kind of feels like early on here. And I think the show is doing well to like not have that be the case at all. As much as like he's the Dragon Reborn, we're making sure everybody else is getting involved and having important stories.
You mentioned in our first part of this season 2 coverage how Sierra Coveney, who plays Elaine Tricon, kind of fits exactly what you were imagining. And the more I saw of her and the more I saw her come into that role nearing the end of the season, I was like, this is Elaine to me now. I really feel like this is Elaine. And Kai, while maybe she didn't have a ton to do, Kai Alexander as Min, it does feel like she has the chops to be like an important character going forward. Like she definitely, I mean, specifically some of the stuff she has with Matt, I felt was pretty intense scenes, and they worked well with each other.
Yeah, totally. And a couple more to shout out. We had the return of Alvaro Morte as Logain. And Logain, I think his performance is like a standout here. Like he doesn't get a ton of screen time, but man, is he captivating every time he's on screen. I kind of realized that this time around, every time we visit in with him and he has this mad look and the way he always seems to know something and kind of have this dark presence. I don't know. I really like what he's doing. To me, he's one of the standouts.
I expected him to have a much diminished role after the first season, and I thought maybe some of the stuff that goes on with him was going to be book two material, like stuff with Logain. I knew he would be somewhat important because he seemed like the first false dragon we saw. But yeah, I think they're finding places to put this actor because he's so good as Logain, and he's sort of
Yeah.
like I mean, he is one of those
I mean, and
actors
Logain
that,
was kind of gone from book two, right? Like, I don't remember much Logain at all.
yeah, I
Maybe he
don't
was
think there
mentioned. I think
was.
he was mentioned being studied or something, but like we didn't get any. I don't think we got any scenes with him. So I think this is also Rafe Judkins being like, I'm going to keep this character present because he might become more
Yeah.
important later on.
Well, and it does make me think that maybe in book three there's some stuff going on with Logain as well.
I don't remember. We'd have to. We'll get into that one day. But really, I'm working my way up to talking about Nakasha O'Keefe, who, admittedly, I was more on the fence about early. I think the Celine sort of play acting was okay. It was a little kind of odd at first. It took me a little bit to come fully on board, but once she embraced being Lanfear and embraced just how like over the top and dominatrixy she was,
She really was, yeah.
some of the dream sequences, I was just taken with this performance. This is probably my standout of the season. Absolutely love her, and I'm so glad. We'll talk about what went with them with Ishamael and everything, but I'm just so happy with what they're doing with the Forsaken. I
Hmm.
find it really interesting. There are always interesting characters in the book, but I love what the show's doing.
It's really compelling. Like I feel like there's outside of there just being Balsamon as a major threat, these Forsaken seem really formidable on their own,
Yeah,
and they're all. I love that they have motivations outside of like we're just minions of the Dark One, and we're here to
yeah.
be bad.
And we always hear that have them fighting amongst themselves and they have interesting relationships with each other and histories with each other and grievances, and that's always going to be fascinating going forward when you have these. Otherwise, the generals of the Dark Army wouldn't be that interesting, right? If they weren't identifiably human like this.
Yeah, I did think she was a standout as well. The way that she plays off Ishamael, the way they play with each other, and they
Yeah.
have that relationship that's been built up over such a long period of time. And they like I said, they seem so powerful. Like we'll get into some specifics later, but she was excellent, and I want to see more
Yeah.
because I think we
Oh,
will
I'll,
see more.
I'll be talking about her more as we get to her specific moments.
So you mentioned your standout. That was your standout for the season. I'm gonna say I thought my standout for the season was gonna be Zoe Robbins, who was Nynaeve. Through the first half, I was like, wow, just blown away with what she's being given for material, and I actually felt like she was handling it well. And I like Nynaeve as a character, very like defiant and strong-willed on her own. And sometimes maybe that leads her down the wrong path, but I love that character. But then we get into the second half of season two, and Madeline Madden just
Yeah.
completely blew me away. I thought she was a good actor. I thought that she was a good casting for Egwene. She was doing the innocent thing very well. But then we get her into this material, and I was like, this is like Emmy Award worthy. You know what I mean? Like this was really really.
I'm pretty sure
powerful
this
stuff.
show is way too fantasy to get any Emmy considerations, but
Not yet. Wait
not
till
not to say
yeah.
it wasn't deserved, because I agree she was great.
Yeah, and the
She
material
she
is so heavy, and there's it's
yeah.
like the defiance with the trauma. It's pretty incredible stuff.
We'll circle back to this because I like some of the changes that were implemented with that storyline too. Yeah, she was one of the standouts of our original cast, I would say, who's especially someone who hasn't had much of a chance to shine and finally got one. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So the fifth episode is called Damane. Perrin and Hopper leave Elias to save Loyal and the Shinarans. Perrin then returns to the town where they were attacked, which has now been seized by the White Cloaks, led by Dane Bornhold and Aemon Valda. During the following fight, Perrin saves Avienda, a young Aiel woman they had imprisoned, and spares Bornhold's life. Avienda pledges to help Perrin rescue the others as she is indebted to him for saving her. Meanwhile, Suroth is demoted for disobeying the orders of the Shanshan leader Turok. However, Ishamael gains his favor by delivering him the Horn of Valir. Later, Suroth receives Nynaeve, Elaine, and Egwene as Damane from Leandrin, who acts on Ishamael's orders. However, Elaine and Nynaeve manage to escape and are taken in by Rima and Aes Sedai hiding in Falm. Egwene is leashed and presented to Turok by Suroth. Varen arrives at the White Tower to investigate the disappearance of the three girls. This leads her to evidence for the existence of the Black Aja, Aes Sedai sworn to the Shadow. Rand and Moiraine manage to escape Lanfear and take refuge with Anivir and her son Barthanes. Moiraine decides to have Rand enter the World of Dreams, where he might be able to learn what Ishamael is planning. Upon entering, Rand finds himself immediately captured by a waiting land fear.
Let's circle in on Avienda, our introduction of the Aiel, really the first time we've gotten some characters that we're actually kind of interacting with, and this is through a meeting with Perrin. Avienda, portrayed by Ayula Smart, I thought really good. Doesn't have a ton to do here early, but striking, immediately makes an impression, has a badass fight sequence here early against a bunch of the Children of the Light, and I think you're starting to get a sense for how just formidable Aiel are supposed to be
Yeah.
through Avienda. And yeah, what was your impression for this character?
Well, obviously not in the Great Hunt. So I'm
Not in the
assuming
Great Hunt at all. Yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but that's okay.
I thought it was cool. I don't know that Perrin had a ton to do outside of whatever Rand was up to in the Great Hunt. So it's cool to see. And again, I'm torn, and I think I like to see our trio of Taviran together in the book. And like I said before, I'm worried that as their stories get bigger and bigger, we might not see them together all that often, because that's how these fantasy stories tend to go. Is they split up a lot of these people and they have their own paths. And then when they do come back together, it's these monumental things that are near the end of books. I don't know that that's how this will go, but I do worry about that. And splitting them up in this show like that, it's so good for highlighting their individual stories. So Perrin gets to actually jump into the Elias stuff and have his own path with these Aiel women. I miss seeing our main cast together. But just talking about this stuff with Perrin, I like that Perrin saves her, because that makes sense to me as Perrin. Like he would go out of his way to save somebody, even though they're potentially dangerous.
She talks about this concept of tow and how she has tow now that she owes him like a life debt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're extremely formidable too. Like I feel that like they're basically the best warriors in the show. That hasn't been out and out stated, but it's pretty obvious to me from the book and from the show at this point. And
it's one of those. It's like it's it's subjective, right? Because it's like you got sword masters, you got all these
blade masters,
blade masters. You got Lan, who's clearly very good. Then you have Aiel, and it's like, not all Aiel are created equal. Obviously, they're all really good fighters, but even in among them, you're going to have some who are better than others. But and in a straight up one-on-one fight, who would win? It can be fun to debate sometimes. Yeah. But Aiel, betting on Aiel is probably a pretty safe bet in most circumstances.
I just can't. She takes out like 20 white cloaks right here, so I assume that like maybe she's like an elite member for them, but. We keep hearing about these Aiel wars too, and I'm like, so somebody fought battlefields full of these women, and it's like, they seem pretty formidable. Yeah,
we get the Damane, we get Lady Suroth here. She was introduced earlier, but we get a little more of her as the betrayal by Leandrin plays out, and we see Egwene getting leashed.
It's just as horrific as you would have imagined, and seeing it, and they played it up too in the show. There's no question about it. It is horrible, and the stuff that goes on, but just the setup of it, right? Egwene has no idea what this stuff is, right? She's just like immediately leashed, and then she's like coming to realize how bad this can be. And we hear of like a blue Aes Sedai in the other room, who we come to find out didn't last very long. Yeah, it was a sitter, and she's
which is like a leader of the Aja. I don't know if you remember that detail. Yeah, and so
when we first get in there, she's just like repeatedly chanting something, and that makes you think like, oh my god, they've broken this person. And so that's what Egwene is facing down is like a sitter of the Aes Sedai, something that they couldn't even stand up against, and it is terrible. It is like unbelievably scary. The chain thing that the Adam that they put on, like sort of turning into armor, is pretty crazy. And then the effects that they use for like the means of torture and the way that it's affecting them is like this vibrating, crazy. Yeah, like I don't even know what to describe it as other than that. There's like this crazy vibration that seems like they're just like being torn apart from the inside or something.
I like it better than the like idea of getting hit with a switch 100 times or 1,000 times or whatever is kind of described in the book. I think this visually works a little better.
Yeah.
I continue to be very impressed with the look of the Shanshan in this show. Like, I'm amazed at what they're able to do with these costumes, these masks, the way that they're shaving their heads and these long nails, and like maybe they're a little excessive with the sound effects sometimes when they're waving them around, but like it's yeah, exactly. It gets a little too much.
No, but I agree with you. It's so
cool.
Yeah, if you're gonna
Yeah.
make a fantasy show and you're gonna have a culture and a people like this, if you can put this level of production value into it, it adds so much to the show. Because even in the times when I'm like, oh, it looks a little hokey or this person's not working for me, everything else in the scene is working. The production design looks amazing. This looks like they spent so much money on this, the costuming, and it's really well realized. Like you said, the details of like even like the scars on the Suroth's faces that they have, and then sometimes they paint over
The Soldom,
it.
you mean?
The Soldom, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like these like beetle back things that they have that sort of protrude out of their back of their neck. Like it just looks very striking.
Yeah, it's in like a lot of their just like standard clothes, and then it's also reflected in the armor. It's like this insectoid look
Yeah.
that they're all, and that's from the book, but like the way they've realized that on screen, I think is pretty incredible. And I got to shout out their entire design team for doing this, because
It could have
it's
looked
striking
so
every
hokey.
time.
Yeah, it could have looked
It
so
could've.
bad, right? If you tried to just imagine people who were wearing like insect styled armor,
Yeah.
could have looked like a Beetleborg, they could have been running around looking like Power Rangers or something, but instead they look really cool, and it looks like a culture that's been well realized.
Yeah,
As
totally.
terrible as they are, I do want to mention again, like I thought maybe there would be some redeeming qualities for like most of the cultures, but this, like seeing the slavery angle to this, I can't even imagine later in this story of rooting for anyone who's Shanchan. Now, granted, I'm sure that there are some offshoots that like don't agree with these, are extremists maybe, but it seems like they're coming from the Empress, so it's from the top.
At this point, we haven't been given any reason to like any Shanchan characters, really.
No. But they did have an
yeah.
interesting relationship. It's almost like an honor. She feels that Egwene should be honored, but it's like
Rena,
totally not.
It's I love that, because it's like the psychology of a true believer, and this is how this person Rena is able to sell this system of slavery to herself. And one of the ways clearly that she's able to do that is this idea of like, I want a Damane who has bought into this system, and who we can have this relationship, and you can respect me as your soul dom. And like the problem is, to buy into any of that, you have to accept a completely dehumanizing proposition that Egwene is unwilling to accept. And I liked how much she pushed up against it, even despite just how much she's being punished for it, and she can't drink the water, and just like all that. I think we get into some of that next episode, but like, yeah, it's really tough on her, but I love that she's showing a lot of strength here, and I think this is like a really good character building moment for Egwene going forward.
And I mentioned in the last episode, like she's a changed person after this, like
Yeah.
the trauma and all, like she can't be that innocent person from Two Rivers any longer that is so excited to, I mean, she probably will still be excited to learn in the White Tower, but she was just this young girl that went to the White Tower to start to become like an Aes Sedai, and then for her to then be pulled into all of this, like she's a changed person after this. And like I said, I hope she can find some way to cope with it, because I feel like it's just pure trauma for the rest of this character's life.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Let's circle back to where Liandrin actually makes the sort of betrayal, reveals she's Black Ajah, and passes them over to Lady Suroth. It seems like there's this like bickering moment where Suroth is saying like, you'll be leash too one day, and then Liandrin's like, I'm gonna kill you one day.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we both serve the same master, they're like not happy with each other. And Liandrin is actually the one who releases Nynaeve, and I believe Elaine as well, as she's leaving, as just like a final fuck you to Lady Suroth, I guess.
Yeah, like give him.
And I think that was a little bit of a shift. I don't remember that playing out that way in the book.
I preferred the book still, just because this felt like Liandrin wasn't as powerful in this scenario. Liandrin was intimidated, whereas in the book I felt like they were both on equal footing, and they were like, we will clash it one day, and I will kill you. And I can obviously see like a Liandrin outliving a character like this. But I did like, they're giving her more layers. I think she's more two-dimensional so far as I've seen her. Liandrin,
I guess not confirmed dead, but I think Lady Suroth does get blown up later in the season.
Does she?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know that.
Right.
Yeah. Screen.
The naval thing at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see what you're getting at. But I think they're maybe making Liandrin again. I'm getting the sense that they're combining her with a couple other characters, at least one other character so far. And because of that, I think they're making this version of Leandrin a little more complex, maybe, than the version of Leandrin we get in the book.
Well, she definitely is. That's what I was saying. Like she's more well realized. She's a three-dimensional character in my opinion, whereas the book so far, as I've seen her, feels a little more two-dimensional. With her motivations being added in, and then some of the stuff that we get with Lanfear here in this season that like will propel her forward. And then just moments of being like, yeah, I'm evil and everything, but I'm gonna release you. And as on my way out of here, like that adds complexity to a character. Like where are her motivations if she was asked to deliver these people to the Shanshan, but then also is like, not fully complying.
So I got to bring up one of my frequent harps or complaints that I do bring up on the show from time to time, and it rears its ugly head here again. And this is not going to be the last time we're going to see it, even in these episodes. But Nynaeve and Elaine get like shoulder checked into a wall.
Oh yeah,
and both of them are knocked unconscious
by a warder, just like
by a warder. And then we transition to another scene where they're waking up and fine.
Yeah,
and they're finding out they're in a different place. And this is like one of the weirdest TV sins that just continues to happen all the time. It's like, why are TV writers are like incapable of just having a character get taken somewhere else? They have to knock them unconscious and have the moment where they wake up and don't recognize their surroundings and then are fine every freaking time. They never suffer any lingering consequences for being knocked unconscious.
Is it just meant to be a thing to save time? Because they're like this conversation that they would have to go along with it.
Or it's a transition thing. It's like we can't just have them taken somewhere else. We have to make it more interesting and more dangerous. So we're going to have them knocked unconscious.
There's a lot of like, I'm thinking back to like Egwene and Elaine like waking up in the thing with Nynaeve, and then
they get knocked out by Leandrin, and then they wake up in the ways. You're right.
Yep. And then
even there, they've been knocked unconscious like 3 times already just in the last few days, and it's gonna happen more.
It's just like knocking people in the head too, like smashing people. It's like you think they would like be like sometimes
you're unconscious.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, and I think it's one of those things that like you have to do away with that. That's terrible. Yeah.
It's just lazy, I think, and it's take a second and Google head trauma and understand that this is not how it works.
It makes me think of like Dragon Ball Z. In Dragon Ball Z, they would just always like neck chop people into unconsciousness.
Yeah. And that's what it's like. Yeah, Bond, I feel like he would do that. He would do a little chop and knock somebody out. And then
Spock doing just like on the neck.
It's like it's just TV. It's like a legacy of like lazy TV writing that has just like perpetuated itself. I don't know. It bothers me. Maybe some people it doesn't matter, but like the more you start thinking about how annoying and bad it is, then you'll start noticing it. And then a show like this does it so much that it really becomes egregious. But I'll stop harping on it. I will say I liked Rima. I like this yellow Aes Sedai and her warder. And this plays out a little differently, but we get some cool lore. We get to witness another Ajah, which we've talked about how we haven't seen a lot of the other ones very much. Mm-hmm. We get to see her talking with Nynaeve and Elaine.
And she's a yellow Ajah too, which we specifically haven't seen a yellow Ajah who's like been a relevant character yet.
Yeah.
Some of these Aes Sedai have died to get this Adam so that they can possibly use it to free some of the other Aes Sedai and the other channelers that have been taken captive. It adds a lot of baggage. It adds a lot of like history to like this whole scenario they're going into, and the fact that they have like Aes Sedai like planted in other areas to kind of investigate and keep tabs on other goings on is cool. I liked seeing it.
Yeah, and we're going to set up something continued in the next episode. One other thing to set up is that Moiraine has devised a plan with Rand where she wants him to go to sleep because she knows that Lanfear is sort of the master of this dream world. And this is all kind of stuff we haven't gotten a lot of so far in the books. We've had some important dreams, but I don't know that we've heard the dream world being discussed.
No, this was new to me, yeah.
It is such an important part of the series, but I was wondering if they were going to be like do it on the show, because again, it's like a dream world. How interesting is that?
Yeah.
But I like the way they're handling it so far. And Rand agrees to this and goes to sleep, and he wakes up in the dream world facing Lanfear.
And Moiraine says too that if you die in the dream world, you'll die in real life. So that's kind of that's pretty huge going forward. And there's so many worlds. They have like this like portal world with alternate dimensions, and they have this dream world now, the ways, like so many different like
There's fewer worlds in the show so far, but yeah, in the actual like book series, there are a lot of different realities and alternate worlds, and yeah,
And
there's a lot of
and
that
you can
stuff.
use the dream world we see in a little bit to like communicate with people. I'm like, holy shit, that's powerful on its own. That's, to be able to
Yeah,
get messages to somebody almost instantaneously. But what Moiraine wanted Rand to go to sleep, she should have just knocked his head across like a
give
big
him a little
block
whack in
wall
the
or
back of the
something.
head.
He'd be right asleep in the dream world. So, episode 6 is called Eyes Without Pity. In Falm, Rena, a Suldam, tries to break Egwene and makes her understand that she is nothing but a Damane, a magic user who needs to be leashed and controlled by Suldam through the Adam, a caller used to control Damane. Rena demonstrates to Egwene how Suldam controlled Damane and slowly breaks her through physical and psychological torture. Meanwhile, Nynaeve and Elaine ride with Rima and Falm, and they try to open an Adam to rescue Egwene. Unfortunately, Nynaeve channels too much during their attempts, alerting the Shanshan, who come for them. Rima fights the Shanshan to protect Elaine and Nynaeve, but is captured as a Damane. In the dream world, Lanfear tries to convince Rand to join her by promising to protect him from Ashamael and showing him that Egwene is in Falm. She also tells Rand that she will kill Moiraine if she sees them together. At the same time, Matt and Min arrive in Cairhien, and Rand and Matt meet in the Foregate and catch up on their adventures. Rand tells Matt that Egwene has been captured in Falm. However, Min warns Matt that Ishamael intends for him to go to Falm with Rand, where he may try to kill Rand. This causes Matt to avoid leaving with Rand. Meanwhile, Siwan Sanchi, the Armelin seat, summons Moiraine for an audience after Lan warns Siwan of Moiraine's actions. Before Rand can leave to attempt a rescue mission, he is intercepted by Lan, Alana, and her warders, who tell him they can't let him leave.
Back to the dream world. Rand wakes up and he's like pinned up on a thing in
Very,
front of
Christ-like.
Lanfear. Yeah, in front of Lanfear, who's on this like crazy looking throne, and they're in the middle of a desert atop of these mountaintops. She's wearing this insane dress.
Yeah, it's awesome.
She looks so fucking cool, and she's like talking to him, and like his whole thing from Moiraine, it's like, don't listen to her. She's gonna mess with your mind and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm gonna listen to anything this woman's saying to me right now. Like, all my defenses are gone. I'm just like, holy shit.
With these like biblical references and stuff too, it makes me think of the Forsaken as like demons, or like the way that she's presenting herself almost makes me think of like a demon from Good Omens, something like that. That's like very.
Yeah, I was thinking of, there was this movie that Jennifer Lopez was in back in the 90s, and it was about, she goes into like her subconscious or something, and it had this crazy like high fashion look to like everything in there, and that was kind of giving me that vibe. I wish I could remember the name of it.
I have never Google. Seen that. I don't know what that is.
It was called The Cell. For those who might be listening who know about this movie, it was a wild movie.
Any good? Yeah, you recommend it?
I remember it being pretty good. I don't know how well it stands up. I saw it a long fucking time ago when it came out. It came out in the year 2000, looks like. So we're talking pretty old. But it had just insane look to it. The look was so striking, and Lanfear's get up was giving me a bit of that. A bit of that.
And she shows up in everybody's dreams all the time. There's this one moment that I don't know if it's this episode or not. Ishamael is like laying in bed, and or Rand's laying in bed, and Ishamael like rolls to him, and like it's like you think
stroking
he's
his cheek.
Yeah, he's like stroking his cheek, and then you realize he's stroking his cheek because it's actually Lanfear. But the way that she can kind of manipulate people's dreams like that, that's pretty powerful stuff. If you think basically the dream world is just your unconscious real world, if they can really affect you in that way, and you can have these conversations, like you can trick somebody in a dream. Especially when they think it's a dream, like
we'll get more explanation of this in the books. But just my memory of it is the dream world is this like actual shared dream that people can like enter into sometimes.
Oh, so it's not all dreams.
It's not all dreams. It's like, but it's kind of like the space where dreams take place. But there are certain rules to it, and certain people who can channel are able to enter it. And it has some dreamlike rules to the way reality functions. But yeah, this is it's going to be important going forward, and I'm assuming that this show will do a little more explaining, and the books especially will do a lot of explaining into how this all works.
Well, and I really liked how it was used for Rand to see Egwene here. Like for Rand to see Egwene in this scenario, Rand is not going to stand by and let that happen. So that's, and
she sees him, and that's what you're picking up on. Like she actually sees Rand and is like, "How are you here?" So it shows that it is a shared thing. It's not just like he's seeing something one way.
Yeah. And I guess we're supposed to assume that she was asleep for that. Like that wasn't her actually awake, where he was transported and showed himself in the real world.
I want to circle back to something we talked about in our book coverage last week. There's all this talk of like 3 women attached to Rand.
Yeah.
And you've been kind of downplaying it. It's unclear whether or not the show's going to go down that route or not, or at least we'll even like highlight it in the way that the book does.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you thought it could be Lanfear, could be the 3rd woman, because in the book so far they've mentioned Min and Elaine. Egwene is not among the 3 that are described. This is from Min's like visions. This is all not really in the show, so it might be completely changed. So it's not really a show spoiler. But I'm just curious if like anything you saw in the show has affected your opinions of what you think might be going on in the book series.
There's a moment in the final episode that I think there's no question that Elaine is going to be a love interest for Rand. I think that I still stand by my statements about Egwene and the fact that like Rand and Egwene are fated together, and whether that happens, as it's supposed to, as the wheel turns, in this wheel turn, if they will end up together or not. Because I can tell that they are fated to be together.
Because he has like the ability to change his fate is basically what's been said repeatedly about it.
Ta'Viren, and he's the Dragon Reborn. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still stand by the fact that I think that Egwene is a major factor in his relationships. But yeah, there was no Min holding his head at the end. At the end of the book, there's that weird scene out of nowhere where Min is just like holding his head and cradling him.
I don't know if we're gonna go that route in the show. I really don't.
It doesn't seem like the Min has that connection, at least not yet.
But so for now, you're holding fast though. You still think Lanfear might be one of them?
Well, I think I was skeptical even saying it last week. I said something along the lines of like, it wouldn't make a ton of sense just because like she is a Forsaken. But as the season went on, she really does care for him, and she would love for him to, I guess, turn to the dark and join her, and she would be they would be like dark.
She wants to be together with him, yeah, and it's like she loves Lews Therin, and this is like the newest version of Lews Therin, so she loves him because of that. But that's also kind of weird because it's like she's not really in love with him; she's in love with like his past life.
Yeah, but even still, like it's really interesting the way they play that. Jordan specifically in the show follows suit and plays with that, right? Like he is at the same time Lews Therin and also not Lews Therin.
Yeah,
he's Rand al'Thor.
Sure.
And so it can be both things in some scenarios. A little bit later, we hear that Lanfear, Ishamael, and Lews were like inseparable, and they were like best friends basically as well. So that gets my wheels spinning too, and I'm like, okay, so what does that mean for the wheel spins when Rand's best friends with Mat, Perrin, Egwene, Nynaeve? Like we see this clip at the very last episode. Just to jump ahead. Lews Therin like captures the Forsaken, and specifically Ishamael, when Ishamael is like, no, we can work together, we can fix this, and then he locks him away. He's like, I'm sorry, my friend. And you're like, damn, like that could end up being where Rand is if Mat turns, or Mat goes mad from all this dark stuff around him too. Like kind of interesting.
They talk a lot about how everybody around him, they're going to turn to the dark, or they want to like enable them turning to the dark, and that would mirror what happened to the Forsaken.
Just interesting stuff building up, yeah.
So I want to also touch in on Lady Suroth here, who doesn't get a ton of screen time, but I think is doing something really interesting actually. Got a lot of personality coming through, even beyond this like wild look, and the fact that she's this dark friend and interacting with Ishamael, who like obviously has a lot more power than her. And I was getting like Zorg from the Fifth Element vibes from her with that shaved head.
Yeah, totally.
And just her like really intense behavior. And she's telling,
she's like erratic for sure. She's
kind of erratic and like intense. And she's getting Loyal to do the song, and then she like gets
cool.
upset when like it seems to kind of like wow everybody.
She was both in control, and then often I felt like she was just flying by the seat of her pants, right? Like she just like didn't have a lot of control in the scenario and was being totally manipulated by Ishamael.
And the way she was like talking to Ishamael, though, sometimes you're like, damn, this is one of the Forsaken, and she's like yelling at him and like not necessarily treating him with a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And he had to at one point kind of reassert that like he's like, I know why you came to the dark or something, and that seemed to get her in line. Yeah, I don't know if she actually is killed in the last episode. We'll have to circle back to that, but like,
it didn't seem like the
ship got blown up, but I could see her being alive.
And she like I feel like I remember her like lunging away and like maybe jumping out of the boat.
Oh, like jumping overboard, maybe. So another moment to talk about is Lan reveals the existence of the Dragon Reborn and goes to find, to Alana and her two warders. And then they go to find Suin Sanchi, and we see the Amarillan Seat reintroduced to the show because we haven't seen her in a while.
Right.
She does this really cool thing where a bunch of like daggers appear above her head, and she's like ready to shoot him. Thought that was pretty rad. What was your thoughts on her being brought back into the show?
Well, we haven't seen like a lot of her. We haven't seen any like feats of power from her. So I was a little worried that she would be this like she's like a figurehead that might not be as powerful as some of the other Aes Sedai that are out there. And that as far as I can tell, that's not the case. She seems like she's really formidable on her own, and like that knife moment was cool for that. Yeah, I was happy that she came back. She has a lot of like gravitas and weight as a character.
Yeah.
Especially her history with Moraine that we get into a little bit, and getting into the next episode, there's like the whole the meeting that happens. So I was happy, and I kind of felt like
setting that up here.
Her being reintroduced had a lot of like implications for like what else could happen in the season. And this is again, none of this happens in the Great Hunt, so maybe book 3 stuff.
Back in Falme, I think we see this is the moment where Nynaeve does the channeling. The little bit of channeling we've actually seen from her like at all this season, and it's unfortunately draws people to come leash this Aes Sedai, and we see her do battle with them in the streets, and her warder gets killed. She folds a woman up like a pretzel with the one power, which I thought was pretty fucking cool.
Wild, yeah, really wild too. For a yell, and that just goes to show like it doesn't matter what Aja you're in, as far as I can tell. Like you can be really formidable in any Aja. Like you can turn somebody into a pretzel, even if you're a healer. So there's that.
Well, I maybe you could say that like healers are really intimately familiar with like the body and how it works, so maybe that kind of leads to that. But yeah, I think different Aja are definitely like maybe masters of certain kinds of weaves. They're more likely to teach them to each other and learn them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anybody can, if you have the one power, you could learn these different weaves.
And again,
I think you're right. I think they are all formidable in their own ways.
Yeah, and this is another moment too. Like we're already seeing how tortured Egwene is, and how it's brutal. This is like it's starting to ramp up in these episodes where we're seeing like her at one point she's like hung up on a wall and like choking, and like that was horrific stuff. And then we see this Aes Sedai sacrifices herself for Nynaeve and Elaine so that they can carry on the mission. And so they go out, they fight against all these Shanshan, and she gets collared, and that moment of her getting collared hit me like a ton of bricks. It was great. I was like, because she talks about like all the sisters that they lost to get the Adam, so she understands the gravity of all of this situation. She still goes out and she sacrifices herself. And the sad thing is, I didn't see her get released through the whole rest of the season.
Yeah, no, we don't see that. Hopefully next season we'll see.
Yeah, I hope we follow up on that.
In theory, she's still alive. We haven't seen her again.
Yeah.
So in theory, she's still out there somewhere and can be rescued. There's a lot of this Rena stuff where she's again like a lot of this like trying to convince Egwene of the righteousness of their position and the Shanshan way of the world, and it's not going well, and she's definitely torturing Egwene. Difficult to watch at times. Not like it's like gory or anything, but it's just like troubling conceptually.
It was rough for sure. And the only thing that I would say about it is the level of defiance and like how resilient Egwene is through all of it is pretty like telling of the character of her character.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like she has like a deep well. They couldn't break her. That's my point. Yeah. They couldn't break her, and she defied the whole way through.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to say that I like how a lot of this stuff is being translated. I thought this was going to be a compelling storyline in the book, but difficult, I think, to get right. And I think, Rafe looked at this and honestly saw more of an opportunity to lean into character growth for Egwene than even the book necessarily does. I think some of it is left implied, but he wanted to put it on screen, and like we see more of Egwene pushing back and being unwilling to break and bend to this, despite what's being done to her. And this whole plot line, I think, plays out to that effect, and I think is one of the more impressive moments of adaptation I've seen so far from the show.
I mean, it's really compelling stuff, and like I said, like she at one point says something like "I'll kill you" or something like that to her captor, and you
Yeah.
know she means it, and you know she's going to. Like it's only a matter of time.
And one more thing to talk about before we leave this episode is Matt reuniting with Rand just in the streets of Kyrien. And he agrees. He says, yeah, I'm going to leave with you. But then he's talked out of it by Min, who says, you're going to stab him. She's like, seen it. Because of that, he chooses not to go with Rand. And he's like sort of tortured about it. He's like, I would never do that. Why did she see that? See that vision? And chooses not to go with Rand, who is then instead confronted by Lan and brought to see the Amarillan, which sets up our next episode well.
So episode 7 is called Daes Dae'mar. Matt is abducted from Kyrien by Lanfear and brought to Ishamael in Falm, who gives him a tea that shows him visions of himself as a murderer. Nynaeve and Elaine manage to use the Adam to take a Suldam captive after learning from Loyal that only Suldams can approach the kennels where Egwene is held. Perrin and Aviendha meet up with 2 other Aiel warriors, Bane and Shaiad, who join them in their journey to Falm. In Kyrien, Rand is brought to Swan Sanchi, who takes him captive, intending to use him as a weapon against the Dark One. Barthanes is revealed to be a dark friend and tasked by Liandrin with killing Moiraine, but Anivir uncovers the plot and locks him in a cell. Lan learns from Logain that Ishamael didn't steal Moiraine but shielded her. Rand persuades Lanfear to help him to get to Falm, and she assaults the Foregate to distract Siwan, allowing Moiraine and Lan to escape with Rand, who uses the One Power to cut the shield around Moiraine, allowing her to channel again. Siwan finds them as they are about to leave Kyrien through a waygate, but she is ambushed by Lanfear, who easily defeats her and opens the gate, allowing Rand, Moiraine, and Lan to leave for Falm.
A lot to like here. I also thought it was interesting that we bring back a scene that sort of happens at the beginning of book 2, where Rand actually meets Siwan for the first time, and we instead move it here, although it then plays out pretty differently. But I also was excited when I heard about Cat Crosses the Courtyard.
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about that. I was going to talk about that. So the forms, we talked about it last week, specific to Wheel of Time. So Wheel of Time fans, I'm sure, found that to be really fun. And cool, because this is like that land scene that we were missing. I feel like almost he didn't actually train him in any way, but he mentioned, oh, you are trading the sword forms, and there's like, maybe I would love to see a scene in season 3 where Lan makes good on that training stuff at the beginning of book 2.
Yeah, we might still get it at some point. We do get him sort of coaching him on how to talk to the Amarillan and stuff, and she recognizes like, oh, Lan has taught you well or told you what to say.
Yeah, it's cool. All this stuff that goes on here. Last episode and this episode, I'll just say, were my favorite episodes of the season. They really built up to some really powerful scenes. The end of this episode is wild with the Swan and Moiraine connection.
Yeah, so this is all set up here. We haven't gotten this in the books at all. And my memory of it is, if this occurs at all, it's quite different. It's been a long time since I've read it, so I need to read it again. But yeah, we set up this dynamic where it's like Siwan says, like, what we should have done according to Tower law is cage you, Randall Thor, cage you, the Dragon Reborn, and you should have been a weapon for us, not a general. You're just a sort of weapon, and only used at the behest of the Tower, because you're too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. And Moiraine originally was supposed to be teaching you, but she seems dissatisfied with what Moiraine has done and says, like, I guess we're going to go with the original plan, which to me kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't think that's where we were going with this. It didn't seem right for Siwan. Yeah. I'm a little unconvinced by this storyline.
Yeah, and I think that the conflict they have at the end of the episode left me feeling like, in some way, after she compels Moiraine to like close the gate, which was super fucked up, and reminded me of the stuff that was Moiraine saying that she was going to compel Lan to go join another Aes Sedai if she was to go away. So the compelling stuff is super fucked up. It's really,
and it goes back to the Suldam and their whole thing,
taking away someone's free will
and using the power to do it.
Yeah, it's not right to use the power to do that. And I think at the end there's the look that they share, where I felt like Siwan is not going to like have it out for Moiraine now. Like I think she realizes that they're on the, like, they were going to do the same thing. It ultimately just was, Siwan is like trying to be the leader that she's meant to be as the Amerlin seat now, and like think
Right.
about the greater good. And Moiraine is still willing to just like throw all her chips on the Dragon Reborn.
I didn't get as like positive a feel from that look.
Really,
I thought it was animosity. I thought it was
I thought it was like a sorry
anything
look between the two of them.
I got like a mourning what maybe what was like
Yeah,
we used to be in love and now that's gone, and I think they were looking at each other as essentially enemies at
this
this
is the
point.
end. This is the breakup kind of thing.
This is the breakup. That's what
Yeah.
I was getting from the show. And again, like I don't remember it playing out quite that way in the books, but and the relationship's different in the book. But yeah, I thought this was a pretty big change, unless I misread again, because apparently it's obviously pretty subjective, and who knows what exactly was being conveyed there.
And this was also set up with the scene at the very beginning, the cold open, where we get the prophecy. We see the prophecy of the dragon being reborn.
They both received it from this woman who gives the prophecy and then dies upon giving it to them. Yeah.
So that set them down this path for 20 years, and you know they've been on each other's side, but in different capacities. And then you know it leads us all the way to this, where the dragon is here, and he's like you know grappling with his powers, and we gotta try to keep him safe until he comes into his own.
We got to talk a little bit more about Alana and her warders, because I think they've been doing something kind of quietly that's pretty interesting here, and it does set up a moment in the next episode that I do think lands pretty well. But there's this whole thing about equality among warders and Aes Sedai, and they pulled Lan aside, the two warders, at one point and talked to him, and he mentioned how Moiraine said they weren't equals, and they were like, why would you ever think that you are? We are not their equals. We are, you know, here to protect them while they do the important business of being Aes Sedai, essentially, like, kind of shut that whole thing down. But then I did think it was very interesting that here there's this discussion they have where one wants to go follow after Varen's warder, and Alana is like, no, don't do that. I can't risk you being out and about on your own, while Lanfear is like in the city. She'd already started attacking the Foregate at this point. And the other warder, like, sides with, you know, the first warder, and then they're like 2-1, you're outvoted, and the guy goes off. And I was like, that kind of contradicts what they were saying here. Like, if they each have an equal vote in this moment, that even contradicts what they were telling Lan. So that already calls into question, like, what is the relationship of a warder and an Aes Sedai in this situation truly like, you know, which again, I think this pays dividends next episode.
Right.
But I was picking up on it here. I thought it was cool to introduce some complexity to that. It's not necessarily as simple as what they were saying.
Yeah, and it's a case by case thing. It's not like they're not always going to be compelled to do exactly what the Aes Sedai says, and the Aes Sedai doesn't have to listen to the warder. It's like a, you know, symbiotic relationship that they have, and like ultimately they both. It depends on the scenario, I guess, who has the power in some cases. And then,
well, I think there's also distinction to be made between, like, what do you mean by importance and what do you mean by equality?
right.
Like, in this moment of decision, they have equal votes, but would they consider themselves equally as important as Alana? Probably not. So maybe that's more what they mean, like that they're not as important as the.
Well, they've said as much too, right? Like they said, like, you know, she's more important. That's what they said to Lan.
One thing to talk about with Lanfear, love her. She is wreaking havoc on the small folk. She is just destroying people. And I'm like, Rand kind of asked her to do this. Like, I don't think he knew she was going to do it, but honestly, he should probably feel pretty bad, because he's like, hey, help me get out of here. She's like, all right, I guess I'll just go murder a couple hundred innocent people on your behalf just to create a distraction.
And at first it was just like lighting stuff on fire, but then like the explosion started like sending people flying. Like she
was like deliberately killing them.
And the people were flying all over the place and stuff. It was crazy. The Forsaken in this episode especially shows, because I'm still trying to get like a power scale of where people are falling.
What's their power level? You want to get one of those little readers in Dragon Ball Z?
Give me a scouter.
Are you over 9,000?
So I just need to know like you know who it's. Rand is so powerful, but then he's immediately caged by the Aes Sedai, by this Amerlin.
He's all raw power. He has like he has no technique.
she's like any Aes Sedai could take you down easily right now, and you're the Dragon Reborn. That's not acceptable. But then you get like this weird power dynamic because Moiraine doesn't have her abilities right now. She can't channel, and then you see Siuan and her compelling it just gets wild with like the powers in this show, because Swan very easily, even when Moiraine gets her powers back, compels her, and maybe that's like an oath thing versus channeling. Maybe that's a difference.
Yeah, we hear that she swore on the oath rods,
Yeah,
and because of that, she is sworn to obey
yeah.
the
But
Amarillan.
clearly, Swan and the Amaryllis Sea is incredibly powerful and has power over people. Lanfear just like annihilates her immediately with one blast. So
Yeah.
you're like, holy shit, the Forsaken are like for real, like they're big time.
Well,
Villains.
another hint at this is we learn about the shield that is actually in place on Moraine. It's not she has not been stilled or yeah
Yeah,
stilled. It's gentled when it's a man and stilled when it's a woman. Is that
I
what we
think so.
figured
Yeah,
out? Okay, I get them reversed sometimes. Um, she hasn't been that. Instead, we hear that there's this like something that has been forgotten, but somehow Ishamael did this shield and then tied it off. This is the first time we've heard this sort of phrase. Yeah, what were your thoughts on that reveal that you can like create a weave and then tie it off? Apparently,
I thought cool. It was a lot easier for her to get her channeling back than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a multi-season thing where she, struggled with it and like was like a threat on her own even without her abilities, which she kind of, you could argue she was in this season.
oh, I think she did a pretty good amount to show that she is still quite capable, even despite her power.
Yeah, totally. And but then for it to be a not interesting. I like it. I
Yeah.
like the idea of the Forsaken being able to do things that people don't remember because they are so ancient and they have been, turned over so many times by the wheel.
Yeah. What do you
That's
think?
cool.
Do you think there are going to be potential ramifications to this reveal?
Maybe, but
Yeah.
maybe Logain is what you're saying. Like there's some Logain situation that he's not tied
Or
off.
Rand. It's explained to Rand that this was able to be done, and then he cuts through it, right?
Yeah, so he can maybe do that in the future. I don't know. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. It's like once you start showing things being possible to people, and we've got people who have even like some of our characters have been said to be like, oh, they just need to see it once and then they can do it. Maybe some of these old ways are going to start coming back.
I mean, this generation is very powerful, like the Age of Legends and all that stuff too. So yeah, I can see a lot of the wheel turning back over with some of this stuff. Two things we got to talk about right here, and both have to do with Matt. One, I wanted to shout back out that scene with Min was where I really bought into this new actor as Matt, and I feel like he's because I through the season I had been like, yeah, he's becoming more and more like Matt. I like his personality. I like his take on Matt, and then like all that stuff that he's going through where he's struggling with the fact that he's going to kill Rand, and like she betrayed him, and then all the way up until in this episode we get the acid trip, which was hilarious
Yeah.
to me.
Donald Flynn, by the way, is the name of the new performer. We should shout him out because I agree. I think this is like the best moment so far for Matt that we've actually gotten. It's this tea. He's like, here, have some tea. It's going to show you your alternate lives. And we know from the book that this was like a whole portal stone thing. It was very different in the book, but I was kind of happy to see we're going to get it. But I think it is interesting to note that it only really affects Matt. Like in the book, it was a Rand thing, really.
Right. Yeah, and Perrin and all of them. Here, Ishamael, I think it's super funny based on things that I've picked up on from season one. I mentioned some of it here and there, but I was just going to mention I think it's funny that Ishamael's like, yeah, this is something that's been forgotten to time and all this other stuff, and I was like, people forgot about acid, dude. Like you guys all forgot
mushroom tea,
mushroom tea. You guys forgot about psychedelics, man. That's crazy. Yeah. That's
some ayahuasca,
old magic, dude. You got to lean into the old magics.
It's like it'll help you sleep for the first time, and Matt's like, all right, I guess I'll take drugs with you, dude. You're weird, but all right. He's very on board.
Let's trip Balsamon, dude. And then
yeah, totally. I love the line he gives here too, where when Ishamael's first in there, kind of quietly menacing, and he's like, "Is this like a death or a sex thing? Either way, let's really get to it." Like, I like Matt's sort of attitude to this whole thing. Like, he calls people out, and I'm like, whenever Matt's kind of being clever and funny, that's where I'm like, this is Matt at his best. Yeah. And I love that we're starting to get some of that here. Speaking of that sequence, what a weird moment where he like walks over to the mirror and he's seeing his mother like saying you're just like him, and then he's like seeing all these different versions where he's like hanging. Like there's a very important moment where he's like hanging from a rope, and then we see him stabbing Rand, I think, in one of the moments, and we see him do like I think stabbing some of his other friends. A lot of these like alternate versions of himself are traitors, which we talked about a little bit in the book. But then there's a moment where like his mother becomes him, and then he becomes his mother, and then he yells at her, "You're gonna be just like him," and then they both turn back into himself, and then they scream at each other.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's
really
real
good.
weird.
It looked good too. Like it looked visually
Yeah.
like it didn't look as hokey as it could have. It looked pretty cool.
It was pretty cool. It was very drug trippy at the end there, and like went bad on him.
When he looks at his hands and his hands are rippling, I'm like, yeah, he's just
Oh, yeah.
on acid or mushrooms or something. Like I don't know what to tell you. So I also found it really wild that at the end here, Lanfear for one said, "I'll kill Moiraine next time I see her when you with her." And then they travel together in the ways.
Yeah.
They all go into the ways together. And I'm like, what was that trip like? Like, can we see more of that? Because we only see a couple seconds.
She's like,
of
"You're
it.
being quiet back there" at one point, I think that next episode. But yeah.
Yeah. And then ultimately, like,
He slit her throat. Moiraine did.
that's what I'm saying. Like, it seems like there's like some animosity between you two that you should hash out, especially if you're going to be traveling companions. But hey, I guess for the sake of the story, because this is very different from what we get in the book two, for all these characters to end up in the same area.
We got to talk about Bane and Chad, two more of these Maidens of the Spear, I think they're called, that are with Avienda and Perrin. And we see Avienda gets sort of beat up by them. And it's something to do with this toe concept, and that she allowed one of her compatriots to be killed in the fight, and that she's like got toe because of that, and that this is how she's sort of paying for it. What did you think of this whole sequence? We're learning a little bit about the Aiel and their culture here.
Yeah, I just got a tiny little bit of that. They beat each other up when they let somebody else die, so they're very serious about taking combat. They just seem like, a warrior race to me. That's what I'm getting from their culture, and like a lot of their customs are built around that. And then they're looking for the one who comes with the dawn and the leader and all that.
One of these things I've always really liked is there's this quote about like waking from the dream. She woke from the dream, and many people will wake from the dream, and that's their like way of describing death, as if life itself is a dream, and when you die, you wake from it. I always thought that was a pretty cool little description, and we see a little bit of their like religion kind of coming in here, because they have their own belief structure, because that's one thing Jordan does really well, is he develops these different cultures and gives them rich belief structures and all this stuff.
I'll be excited to get more Aiel, because they're that exciting culture so far, that like they're badasses, they're very mysterious, they seem very loyal. Once you have their loyalty, like it seems undying, and so it'll be cool to get into that.
One note that kind of bothered me in this episode was Lan comes to Logain, and again, I'm just happy to see Logain because I think he's great, and this is where he finds out about the shield, and he doesn't promise him out and out this key, but he like comes and sets it on the table, and then Logain does what he asks, and then Lan's like, "You're never gonna get this key, no, fuck you," and leaves with it. I'm like,
That's
Lan
not
is
Lan.
way too honorable.
Yeah,
he would
he would not
totally give him
lie.
the key in that moment.
I wrote that down too. I was like, I kind of don't believe that Lan, as honorable as he would be, he wouldn't have even offered it in the first place if he wasn't
prepared to get it. Exactly. Yep. So I'm glad we both picked up on that. That's it felt like kind of a wrong moment. That's where I'm at still with this show. As much as we're like singing its praises and liking stuff, every now and then you get a moment like that where you're like, that doesn't feel right for the character. I don't know,
And I guess it's like, show watcher's not going to know that necessarily, and he's still honorable enough, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think of this as like, if you want to talk about it from like a book purist standpoint, because I would love to know, like, massive fans, right? If you're a huge Wheel of Time fan, let us know, because I found myself like pretty optimistic and pleasantly surprised with this, and it's continuing to get better. I would like to know if like massive book fans feel the same, or if they're like, oh no, it's not really checking the boxes for me.
I was talking with someone recently who was not very excited about season 2, hadn't watched any of it yet because of lingering disappointments from season 1, and I kind of told him, like, if you liked anything at all that was going on in season 1, I think give season 2 a chance, because I do still think this is an improvement. I'm not the biggest book fan in the world, like you might be talking about, book purist fan, but as someone who grew up on the books and loves them, I'm still on board with this, even as I have nitpicks about certain choices that are being made.
I saw someone on Reddit talking about the Wheel of Time, and they had this interesting viewpoint, and they were basically saying that you should view the show as like a different turn of the wheel, or like an alternate turning of the wheel from what we get in the book. And like that, like for me, I was like, I bet you people would be into that if they kind of reframed it in that way.
Yeah, this is another turning of the wheel. I like that. Oh, I wanted to ask you. So there's these Perrin shots where he's with the Aiel, and they're, I think it's during this whole tow sequence, later on when they're walking together, and I think it's a day for night shot.
Oh my
We talked
God.
about this a little bit.
Yeah.
I just
Don't
thought
even
it
get me
looked
started.
bad here. And it didn't. It wasn't convincing at all. Like it still looked like daytime with just like a weird haze on it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what is going on here? Is this supposed to be nighttime? Because I don't even believe it's nighttime.
Yeah. I felt like they were like having to in post just say like the audience will assume it's dusk or like something that, you know what I mean, like it's like barely nighttime, but you have to do it correctly, man. If your actors are looking into the horizon in the desert and they're squinting in the middle of the
Yeah.
night and there's shadows all over their face, like I'm gonna unless it's like a massive, like a crazy moon, you're not gonna get a lot of shadows.
No. Yeah.
Like if it's clear sky above somebody, so like you have to like you
Yeah,
have to
because they're
make
in a
that.
cloudless desert. There should be
Yeah.
stars. There should. Yeah, this is not at all what night would look like.
And I
Is it
get that
just so?
they
Is it why is it so hard to film at night? Is it just like impossible to get this scene if you're actually shooting at night?
like if you're shooting with digital cameras and stuff, noise is a big factor. Like if you shoot something that's black and you're not careful about like your dynamic range, you can end up with like a lot of like almost noise or grain is what it was called in film, where it looks unprofessional, like it doesn't look good. So it's hard, and it's hard to shoot at night. It just is.
But this doesn't look good.
Yeah, and this doesn't look good. I think it just comes down to it's a TV show, and I think that this is probably the storyline that got the
Yeah,
least
like, we
budget.
got to shoot it today.
Yeah.
We can't wait and do it at night or something for real.
And you can do day for night and it looked good. Like Nope did that. Jordan Peele's Nope did that. And like they did it with really specific technology and techniques, but you just have to be intentional with this kind of stuff, like attention to detail. If it's going to break someone's immersion, like I don't know, man. Sometimes it might just be like you said, maybe just film at night, like figure it out, get some big lights out there and some generators, but it's not easy and it's expensive.
Have them sit around a fire and use the fire as the light source for the scene. Like do something like that. So I was thinking of like House of the Dragon again with that infamous moment where I love that show. Like I love that season, but like there were some moments where it was so hard to see anything and it was like, why are we looking? Why does this?
Well, and
look
they
like
shot
this?
Day for Night too. One of those like banquets or something was Day for Night. And it didn't look great either.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that was
Yeah.
what it was reminding me of those moments.
Hopper is traveling with them through the desert, and I just felt so bad for that dog. I was like, get that dog a water bowl, and like,
Yeah,
I was
first
so...
off, yeah. I mean, like, I know that it's going to be hard to have like a real wolf, but like this looks so much like a dog to me that it's like a wolf-like dog, but it reminds me a lot of like what we got from the early seasons of Game of Thrones, where you know,
the dire wolves.
the dire wolves. But this is supposed to be like a full-grown wolf, but it looks like a dog to me.
Yeah, you gotta like
small
size
distinction,
it up.
but like, yeah. I agree. Like, it's not really treated seriously. Like,
Yeah, and to go back and include Hopper, like I really expected them to do more building with Hopper because he just had a couple scenes here and there, and then he's walking with them, which is great, and he's a cute dog and everything. But what we get at the end, in the last episode, we'll have to touch on because
let's get to the last episode because I know we have a ton of moments to talk about.
Yeah, so episode 8 is called What Was Meant to Be. Lanfear throws Moiraine and Lan out of the ways outside of Falm before transporting herself and Rand into the city where Rand confronts and kills Turok and his men. Lanfear alerts Ishamael to Rand's presence, making him realize she has betrayed him. Ishamael has Padden Fane deliver Mat the dagger from Shadar Logoth to kill Rand with, but Mat refuses to take it and escapes. The White Cloaks, led by Dane and his father Geofram, attack Falm in an attempt to eradicate the Shanshan. During the chaos, Ingtar, Loyal, and Masema escape with the Horn of Valir and join the battle alongside Mat, Perrin, and the Aiel. Egwene manages to break free from her Adam and kill Rena. Mat is forced to blow the horn, summoning the heroes of the horn and turning the tide of battle. Rand, Egwene, Nynaeve, Perrin, and Mat reunite and are confronted by Ishamael, who has Rand shielded from the One Power, and tricks Mat into wounding Rand. While Egwene and Perrin fight Ishamael, Moiraine frees Rand from the shield, allowing him to slay Ishamael. Rand is proclaimed the Dragon Reborn before the whole city. After the battle, Lanfear is confronted by Moghedien, another of the Forsaken, and learns all Forsaken have been set free.
When Moiraine and Lan get knocked out of the ways and we arrive on this beach, I thought this was one of the coolest places I've seen. I loved this spot. It was so cinematic and cool. And then it ends up being the place where the rest of their interactions of the episode happen. But man, seeing that big structure out just like in the water, and how like blue that was. Like, as much as I was giving them shit about like the day for night stuff, like this looked amazing.
It really did.
I was really taken with it.
I thought it looked very striking. It looked visually interesting, but why didn't she turn around and open the ways back up?
Yeah, maybe because I don't know. I don't know.
They
That's a
got
good
booted
question.
out,
I
and I
guess
was like,
maybe Lanford would still be in there and just be like, "Why the fuck are you coming back in here?"
I guess but she like kicked them out, which is like an aggressive thing. You'd think that she's
Yeah.
gonna do something sketchy with Rand then, but I think my headcanon was that she didn't want to reopen the ways because Swan told her not to open the ways or told her not
Mm.
to interact with the ways anymore. So maybe that's like a thing that she's still making good on. And that actually reminds me of the honesty of the Aes Sedai and the cunning nature in which they stay honest. I love that like they navigate these lies by leaving out information or
Moraine's like,
choosing
"You
their
were very
words.
careful with your words, Varen." Yeah.
I love it. I think it's so cool that like they're not lying. And
Yeah.
there's a couple times where I paused and I was like, wait, did they just lie? And I was like, no, I guess they technically didn't lie.
Yeah.
So I just find that really fun and interesting about the Aes Sedai.
Yeah, it is fun. It's like the little like truth lawyering stuff of like, can I get away with saying this in a way that is technically true,
Yeah.
even if it's not actually true. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that
Specifically,
stuff. That's fun.
Varen, I believe is her name.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
like comes in and takes over the shield on Rand, and
yeah.
she said like, "I'll take over the shield." She didn't lie when she said that. She said, "You're the Amerlin seat needs you to help the rest of the city." Technically, not a lie because it would
Yeah.
be helpful to have another Aes Sedai.
So Padan Fain shows up, and in a moment that I thought I didn't believe the version of Padan Fain from the books at all would do this, leaves the dagger with Matt. Padan Fain in the books is like obsessed with the dagger to the point of it being like a defining characteristic of the character now. So the idea that he would do this, I thought was a little I don't know, but I did like Matt being sort of clever again, using some cloth to wrap the dagger onto the end of a stick, and before you know it, he's created this cool looking spear with a dagger on the end of it. And a little bit of a book spoiler, but like Matt fights with a spear a lot later in the books. And so this was a really cool, like, oh, okay, we got him. He's got his spear early. And then I thought it was funny how the dagger is very lightsabery. All of a sudden, he's like stabbing it through locks and melting stuff, and he's like cutting through the box later to get the horn out. It turns into a bit of a lightsaber, but pretty sweet. And he all of a sudden he's fighting and doing some cool shit that we haven't seen Matt do much of.
Yeah, it's nice to see him, especially with what we get. He blows the horn. Eventually, he gets desperate, and he blows the horn. And I think that like him being the one to blow the horn signals to you that like he's not going to be a bad guy. He has the Horn of Heroes on his side. Like he's still,
yeah. Did you notice some of the differences in how this played out? And one of the key things he says right after he blows it,
go for it. I don't remember.
he says, "Ah, now I remember."
Oh yeah, and he gets to see himself as a hero over and over again, which confirms that like he isn't actually a betrayer in all these different lifetimes. Like he's being
Yeah.
led to believe by these visions.
Well, it seems that he remembers past lives. Or he seems to remember being a member of these companions.
Pretty cool
That
stuff.
wasn't really highlighted in the book, at least in book two. But I think Rafe made a point to bring this up into book two or into season two. I assume some of this stuff will start coming out in book three.
Yeah.
Because it is a big thing for Matt going forward, but I thought it was kind of weird how much we didn't talk about that when it initially happened. Almost like Robert Jordan probably hadn't planned it all out yet. When he
like he was writing like a 14-book series that eventually would advance a little further.
And building it
than book
as he went. It didn't,
It's a couple of things with this here. My imagination of the horns, the heroes of the horn, was a lot larger scale than this. I expect, people flying around and like, doing all this stuff. It was cool to see like basically just like a bunch of warriors, and they had like sort of a sheen to them, like a sort of like after image.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. They were moving really quickly. We see Arthur Hawkwing. He doesn't talk much. We see some of the others. We see Bergetti, I assume. I think these are some characters that if they come back in the future, we might be recast. I think that's why we didn't spend a lot of time with them. It was like, we're not going to take our time to like really make sure we've cast the right person for this.
Yeah.
We'll just have somebody in there for now, and then we'll get somebody who looks kind of similar to wear the same armor later.
I guess I would say it's just enough for me. I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was a big momentous occasion when he blows the horn and all these heroes show up, and it's really fun to see Matt happy and not so dreary, and he's leaning into that stuff. And
weird looking horn. I don't know about the design of this thing. It didn't look at all like how I pictured
like
it.
a trumpet. I thought it was gonna be a trumpet.
Kind of like a toy to me. Like it was very strange. But I was mostly okay with it. I think this is a moment that's very hard to get right. It's kind of cheesy, honestly, even in the book. But like it works a little bit because it's you're not seeing it. But as soon as you're going to put this on screen, it's like it's going to be kind of hokey and cheesy, and the heroes of old showing up at the blowing of this horn, and then they're fighting, and it's like, how is this going to look and be convincing? And not
I just thought it was going to be larger in scale, like just like overtaking the city and
yeah, they didn't really they just helped. It wasn't like it immediately changed everything when they showed up. Yeah.
Uno is a member of them now too, and I just felt like he didn't have enough.
Uno, who unexpectedly died in the show, is now a member of the heroes.
I didn't think he was going to have enough screen time to sort of justify that, but I think it's cool to bring him back in this way. But it brings it like, does one join because he didn't die a very heroic death in the show.
Yeah, it's kind of unclear, because if the idea is he is new to the heroes based off of his life, I don't necessarily see why that would be the case. If instead they're playing that like he is already a member of the heroes, and this is just like a version of him that was spit out in this time period, which is something that happens time and again with these heroes.
Yeah.
Then that makes sense to me, because I'm like, okay, he was always a member, but because he's actually Uno and says like, oh, you didn't expect to see me among the heroes, like they're kind of implying that he got to join them, which I agree. Like he didn't really do enough to necessarily justify that.
Yeah.
But
also, does it mean that I'm starting to get, I'm sure this is book stuff that will be answered, but just to state it, wouldn't there be a version of Matt that showed up too if he's always a member? But I guess if you're spit out, you don't show up when the horn is blown.
Yeah. Yes, I think when you are spit out, you are no longer now a spirit who is among them, because you're in the real world
until you die again,
until
and then you
again.
rejoin them. Got it.
Maybe that's my take on it. Again, it's been a while since I've read it. So let's move back to Lan and Moraine for a second here. They're having this heart to heart, and they talk, and Lan brings up the whole equality thing.
Yeah.
And I actually found this moment quite touching, and Moraine saying, you were always my better. And again, this is something that I think we've kind of built to with what I was talking about before. A little subtle maybe, but I think it was there.
I think it was expected. Like I kind of assumed that there was something at play like this, that she wasn't going to be a total asshole to him and just say like, you're my inferior. But it was satisfying, like you said. Like it still did hit, and I like those performances. Those actors are absolutely incredible, and I think that they're doing a lot of work that the material is having to catch up with. Yeah. I think that they're sort of elevating the material in a lot of ways. And so for them to like, and to reestablish the bond, I thought was very emotional. All that.
The way it looked, like tied them together, and it was all swirly. And again, they're in this stunning location.
Yeah.
I thought all that was really cool.
And then they go back to back, and then Lan fights like 20 dudes, and she starts like destroying an armada with her weaves. And
I was like, oh, it's so nice of the Shanshan to come running down onto the beach to give Lan something to do, because otherwise he's standing around while she's doing all the important stuff.
For sure. He
gets to catch an arrow out of the air and all kinds of shit.
Oh yeah, that was pretty cool. It was pretty awesome.
And then we go back to like what's happening inside the city, whereas like the battle has been moved into the city, and it's just kind of being fought among the streets, which I think is kind of a smart way to like keep the scale close. Like you're never going to see big battlefields full of all kinds of soldiers. You kind of always see like maybe 50 to 100 at a time. Yeah, that way you don't have to like figure out a way to have 1,000 people on screen at the same time. That kind of makes sense. As much as I did kind of miss some of the stuff we get from the book, but Turok here in Rand confrontation. Oh, I see. Let's see what they've what it takes to have a heron marked blade on this side of the ocean. He pulls out his sword, and he looks like he's getting ready for this badass fight, which we know in the book. Two blade masters fighting. It's gonna be so cool. And then Rand kills everybody with and it looks like kind of the ice thing, like the dagger thing that he saw Suin do. It was kind of similar to that, maybe.
Pretty terrible deaths too, right at the throats. Just slash all the throats.
Very huge display of power from Rand in a very like targeted way, like a very like precision way, but also like, I don't know, how did you feel about this? This was a little bit deflating to me, because I thought this was such a big moment for Rand in the book.
Budgetary cut here, I think, a little bit. I think they
cut for time.
It's the choreography that you would want to show off for two blade masters fighting, I think would take like an entire season of choreography build up for them to like really pull it off. And I think we'll see that eventually. I just think now wasn't necessarily the best time for them to show that.
I also wanted to talk about this random thing with Ingtar. Ingtar's death in the book plays out quite differently. It's like he's revealed that he actually is a dark friend, and then Rand ends up forgiving him, and he has this self-sacrifice moment. Here he still self-sacrifices, but we get none of that context, and it feels very out of the blue. He's just like, I think one man could hold off 50 people here. He's like, yeah, I think they could. And then they like walk a few feet, and he's like, all right, I'm off. And he just runs off and just like throws
He's
himself
like,
at
for the
this
light
Shanchen.
and something,
Yeah.
and he
And
just
he
like,
just
yeah,
dies,
gets
and I'm
taken
like,
down.
as a show watcher, this must have made no sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
because this character's been around for a while, and he's done a lot.
And he's very serious about like, we got to get the horn out of here. We got to do this. And then he's persuaded. And then he's like, you know what that means? Time to do business. And then he just gets torn apart. He just gets overwhelmed by these people.
Yeah, and it also, they do the frustrating thing that they like to do on TV, where like one character is sacrificing himself so everybody can escape, and so the other characters just kind of stand around and watch it instead of moving.
Yep.
And it's like by the time the character's actually dead, they're like, I guess now we'll go. And I get it's because you want the characters to like witness the sacrifice, but you're also like kind of fucking up the whole point of it if you're not going to use this time that he's buying you to get the hell out of there.
Yeah. Bit weird, yeah. And obviously, like, not having him be the dark friend and the whole Rand thing, they just didn't have
Too
time for
complicated,
it, yeah.
didn't have time to set it up probably.
I would love to get, maybe next season they'll do it, maybe not, but I would love to, like, you mentioned it before, give us 10 to 12 episodes of this show. Because that would help with the pacing issues, and I know that the budget would inflate, but that would help with some of the pacing issues, and then you can have the moments like Ingtar sacrificing himself, being revealed as a dark friend, and then turning back to light, and then Rand seeing that sacrifice, and that being something that, you know, builds up, becomes the foundation for this hero, the Dragon Reborn, and all the sacrifices that went into him being where he is, and, you know, the eventual, whenever he's like, you know, the Messiah of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So focusing in on Egwene now, she is being taken by the Soldam Rena to this tower. They're going to defend the city. And she says, like, if you fucking try not to do something I tell you to do, I'm going to cut your tongue out and cut your hands off and all this shit. And they go up to the tower, and at first she sees some white cloaks, Egwene does, and she's like, all right, I'll blast them.
Well, and the white cloaks are like, burn the witches, burn the witches. And she's like, I mean, like, fuck, these guys are bad guys, man. I'll kill some bad guys.
Yeah. And then, but then of course that changes a little later when she sees it's like innocent people now that she's supposed to be blasting, and she refuses. And then the trebuchets get launched from the Children of the Light. The whole Children of the Light attacking the city thing, I gotta say, very haphazard, not very believable. There's like 8 children with these like cinctures that they're waving that apparently created an entire mist so big that it can enshroud an entire army, including a bunch of trebuchets that they're dragging along with them, from anybody seeing it. Yeah, from the entire city of Ulm.
I kind of assumed that was like partially like a dust up of sand, and then they also were adding like smoke as like a ceremonial thing, but maybe
I don't know. Perrin said that doesn't belong here when he saw it, so I think it's just supposed to have been created by them.
Yeah, wild, amen.
And without some sort of magical boosting, which they definitely don't have because they're very against magic.
Yeah,
I just didn't believe this was possible.
Sure, yeah, neither do I. I thought it was what was meant to happen. Yeah,
we just rush it, get in there, whatever, have them be there.
Egwene's battle, her fight back. So they, you know, the tower gets hit, and then everybody's down except for her and the Rena, I believe her name is, and
Rena,
their final confrontation, in the way that Egwene figures out that the Adam is only working because their channeling as well, worked for me. I like that change.
Yeah.
And also the fact that like so I both like and dislike a couple of things that happen here. Nynaeve kind of had figured out how to take care of the callers, and she comes and helps Egwene, thereby saving Egwene. I like that Egwene saved her
in the book.
In the book, I'm sorry,
yeah.
And so she saves Egwene, and then that gives Nynaeve something cool to do that's really relevant. But it takes away some of the agency of Egwene sort of fighting back and doing all this on her own, which I understand that change. But the effects of that are Nynaeve and Elaine don't have anything to do here. And unfortunately, they fabricated like Elaine getting hit with an arrow, and then Nynaeve is just like, well, I can't do anything for it. I'm gonna shove it through your leg, and then we're gonna walk all the way up the tower so that we can
another
be there for
terrible TV cliche moment. Feathers and everything still on the end of it. She doesn't break it off. She just pushes the whole goddamn thing through.
Yep.
Also, just don't do it. I know it just seems like a silly nitpick, but like, people in real life are gonna get objects sometimes. Like, it can happen to you in a traumatic accident. Something is stabbed into you. They will think about the TV shows they've seen and think they need to pull that thing out, push it through. They're going to need to do some bullshit to it because that is for some reason important.
Pee on it. You know,
don't pee on it.
Yeah.
Leave that fucking thing alone. it's better off in you. You're gonna just bleed out to death. You're gonna bleed so much faster to death after pushing that thing through than you ever would have done if you just left it in there until you could actually get healed by somebody.
You know what'll also make you bleed out faster if you do pull it out is climbing an entire tower of stairs to be there at the final battle.
She just had to push it through, and then she was okay at that point. She was just fine.
Well, it's just frustrating. So that we were poking fun because it's like they didn't have anything else to do, so they made this up, and then it's frustrating that like all of this stuff goes down. But
and Nynaeve again still couldn't channel and do anything.
Yeah, that was a
little
bummer.
Weird. That's like she didn't get to do anything in this final episode.
Do a little bit of healing or something. Again, Egwene saving herself, points for that. That's awesome. That's cool. That's
agreed.
How it should
I
be.
do like that change.
You know, seeing the final confrontation, her figure it out, I thought that showed her agency. She's clever.
Well, and her getting her besting Rena ultimately, that's way more rewarding than Nynaeve coming in and sort.
And I was also happy that she let her die too. I was like, that like some characters sometimes like will say, "Oh, I'm gonna let this character live."
I'm a little torn about it. It was pretty merciless, but she had like sort of promised, "I'm going to kill you." I do wonder if this is going to be something where we'll see Egwene sort of return to later, if she'll have any, conflicted feelings about it after the fact. Maybe this is just a little bit of like Star Wars, like getting to me of like, don't give in to the dark, be better than them. But no, they decided to go the more like, no, fuck you. I'm going to let you slowly choke in front of me for what you've done to me.
Consequences of your actions are a real thing. Yeah. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, totally. I just, it's like the story at times doesn't feel like that's what it is, but then it can be. So maybe I'm just wrong on that, and maybe that's.
I mean, Perrin
or the show version's a little different, maybe.
Yeah, Perrin would have let her live for sure because that's his character, and I guess I don't know.
Yeah, he let that Bornhold character live at one point, right?
Yeah,
because he gave her water, is what he said to Avienda.
Yeah. And to talk about the parent stuff too with Hopper that we have to address. I just having just lost my dog recently, it was too much for me, and I thought that they like went out of their way to make it more brutal than it needed to be. With Hopper's death, and it's devastating. They show the cute dog like dying. It's so sad, man. It's so.
And Hopper
bad.
Like dies in the book, but Hopper dies in a self-sacrificing way, taking out a few people and sort of succumbing to his wounds. I remember correct. I can't remember exactly how it played out, but I remember it being different. This was just kind of like arbitrary. The dog is like attacking Valda, I think it was, killing him, and then Joffrey just comes up with his axe and just takes it right to the back of this dog's neck. And then we focus in on this like cute dog's eyes. It's like whimpering and bleeding out. Yeah. It was like so heavy-handed and kind of like obvious emotional manipulation, and the kind of thing that, like, I don't know, dogs and pets dying in general is such a difficult thing to put on screen and to do well and to not turn people completely off from the show. So I just don't think this was particularly handled well.
Me either. Yeah, it was too much, and it was so that Perrin would run around and then kill one guy too. Like it didn't make sense, and they felt like they needed to put it back in, and it didn't work. Yeah, unfortunately. He kills I think it's Dane Bornhold. He kills his father, Joffrey. Yeah.
Which clearly that's going to be important going forward. The fact that he sees him kill him and knows that it was him. Perrin flies into a rage. His eyes turn golden. But Perrin, like, as much as I want to circle back to Perrin and say that, like, as much as I've been giving them credit for like what they've been doing with Matt and like improvements to Egwene's storyline, I still am not liking Perrin in the show.
And it has nothing to do with the performer either. I actually like the performer a lot.
Yeah, he's okay. He hasn't had a lot to do. He hasn't had a lot of like good moments to work with. Like we finally got with Egwene here. Like we haven't got anything like that for him yet. Maybe that'll come. But yeah, I've just been so I don't know, Perrin as a character is just not translating well for me. Doesn't feel like the same guy. The writing around it has just not been as clever as it has been elsewhere. Feels like they don't really know what to do with it at times. Sometimes it feels tacked on. The Hopper stuff felt tacked on. It was really weird when he just tells him to stay out in the middle of the fucking desert. So you just stay here, and I'm like, what? You can't just stay there. What are you talking about? It's all.
I hope that the major improvements that are done in season 3 are for Perrin's character. I hope that is remedied quickly, because he's one of my favorite characters.
I said it in the books. He is maybe my favorite character from the series, and it's been pretty awful what they've done with the character so far in the show, starting all the way back to episode 1. So
yeah. So this brings us to the final battle here with the Ishamael. I'm all for the power of friendship, and I'm all for like these characters being so meaningful to the story that them together are stronger than they are individually and everything like that. This was the most heavy-handed thing they did this season. I'm fine with it happening this way. I think that it's a culmination and it's fun, and I like that they're all together. I like ultimately like what happens here, but man, it was convenient for everyone to end up there. Elaine to do the healing so that Rand could then fight, and then obviously like Moiraine knocking down the fleet in time to get his shielding taken off.
Well, we didn't talk about Matt.
Yeah,
Matt with the spear throw. What'd you think of that moment?
I'm fine with it ultimately. It just like
it
felt
fulfills
like,
this prophecy that we didn't get in the books.
Yeah, they needed to show it.
He's the one stabbing him in the book. Ishamael is the one who stabs Rand in the side.
Yeah.
Instead, it's sort of Matt's spear fling here.
Accidental. He throws it.
It was okay.
Ishamael disappears and it hits Rand.
It was like an illusion.
And it's like a magical dagger, obviously, so it's fucking him up more than just like a normal stab would.
Yeah, well, we've seen it like instantly fucking people up. Yeah. And it gets healed by Elaine, and then it's got some like weird black stuff.
Oh, it's gross.
Still, so it's looking pretty bad. So it feels like that's going to be a continued problem going forward, right?
Yeah, and it's going to mess up our lead's like super hot jacked bod next time he's shirtless with Lanfear. And it's going to be
sliced up the abs a little bit. Come on.
Yeah.
So how many crunches he has to do to keep those?
Yeah. I like Egwene sort of like being the one who's doing most of the work here at the end. She's like shielding and like he's like firing. Ishamael's firing all these blasts.
Ishamael does like one thing I will give you, because like I'm ultimately kind of okay with this, because the whole ending of book 2 and the fight in the sky and like it's so weird and conceptual and hard to picture, and I like the idea of just like bringing them all together and having them all there at this moment. But Ishamael just keeps firing these little like fireballs at this shield.
Yep.
And doesn't ever change his tactic at all. He just keeps doing it as it's clearly not working. And this is like one of the most clever characters we've ever seen, right? Like he's always like 3 steps ahead, and this is just like, all right, I guess I'll just keep firing fireballs at you until you stand up and are able to come and figure it out.
So, and then just his death was too quick too. Like Rand just walked up, powered up his sword, got it all flamed up, and he got his Heron Mark, brand.
I mean, it does kind of go down that way in the book, though. Like they have a very short fight, and then he gets stabbed, and then his Heron Mark blade melts, and he gets branded on the hand, like, and that all spread out of the book.
It just felt with all the build up and everything, and then all the characters being there, and it just felt like, I don't know. I wanted a little more from it, and I'm not as low as I was in season 1 with like the finale here, but it just felt like really, really contrived. Like it was something that I've seen before.
I would be more upset about this because I did really like I think it's Faris performance. I think he was a standout from this season. I didn't give him enough credit earlier. I think Ishamael was really good.
Yeah.
But I think the emergence of Lanfear makes me okay with Ishamael getting sort of killed off here. And then I liked the reveal at the end where it's like, oh, Ishamael figured you weren't going to help him and you were going to betray him. So he went ahead and released all the other Forsaken, which is a cool little reveal at the end there.
Oh, I'm excited for that. That leaves me wanting more for sure. But I also want to say, too, like the whole projection in the sky of the battle and everything like that. I was cool with the dragon. I thought the dragon coming out is a signal. It's plenty for me. It's all I needed to show everyone that the dragon has been reborn. The dragon's here. I thought it looked pretty cool overall.
Yeah.
That wasn't any of the problem I had.
Moraine's able to craft it with her power. She's showing off a lot of power now that she's not shielded anymore.
I actually really loved the way that they depicted it too. Like she was like bent over, and the way that she's like bending all of it.
She like catches there's like flames being shot from one of the ships, and she like catches one and turns it into that flame dragon thing.
Right.
So it's not just something she's doing purely created whole cloth from the power. She's like borrowing something that exists in the world and changing it into this flame dragon, which was cool.
Well, that's what she did with the initial explosions too. I'm just talking about the way that she weaved all the stuff on the beach. All of her weaving on the beach looked really fucking cool. And like they went like super shallow depth of field with it too, and it looked really cinematic.
And in general, I like the way they're handling the magic here. We're seeing all kinds of different ways in which you can use the one power to like wreak havoc and kill people. and do many different things. Like early on in the show, I remember that was a criticism was it didn't feel varied enough, and here we're getting a lot more of that.
The final Forsaken that we see there at the end with the spider web looking
Yeah,
thing was
Mogideon, I think is how they say it in the show. I've never really known how to pronounce that name. Very cool, very spider like.
trapped in a web.
She traps
yeah.
Lanfear with this like weird spidery thing, like a web like thing, and has a different whole vibe than Lanfear. And I like how she said, like you and Ishamael, you're too close to Rand. You always like, treated him like your friend and went easy on him. The rest of us never had that problem. And I don't know. I'm excited to see some more Forsaken. I'm excited to see the way they interact with each other because, again, I think those scenes always shined here.
Definitely a great way to tease me into the next season and into more of the story. It's like, okay, there's the threat that's going to be there. We know kind of what Rand is going to have to deal with now that he's been revealed as the dragon. So I'm really excited, and I like where it left off. As much as maybe that conflict didn't necessarily like culminate in my imagination, what I thought was going on. What I imagined was a little bigger than this, but it was good. It was good for what it was, and some of the better episodes this season really blew me away.
Good season overall, improvement from season 1 for sure. But what we got to do here at the end of our coverage is compare it to the book, since that's what we do. So the question is, what's better, book 2, The Great Hunt, or season 2 of this show?
Yeah, I'll go first, and I'll keep it pretty brief. I really like this show. I said before, it's one of my favorite fantasy shows right now, and I think it's because, like, as far as high fantasy is concerned, it's very expensive to create. There's not a ton of it going on right now. I just love this type of story. I love like epic sagas that go on forever and really interesting character work that evolves over time. So this show did a lot of things that I agreed with. I like a lot of the changes they made. Tons of improvements from the first season. A lot of these performances, I'm starting to be like, oh my God, they may have struck gold with some of these performers, like finding them young as unknowns. And I think, specifically the women in the cast, the guys are developing, and I think Matt's doing pretty well. Rand's all right, and hopefully Perrin gets a little better. I don't think the performers are the issue at all. I just like to see them continue to maybe slow down the pace a little bit, let us live with these characters, and because of all of that, I'm gonna have to go with the source itself, the one power, the true one source. Robert Jordan's The Great Hunt. I just had so much fun with it, and it is sort of a throwback fantasy story, and there's like maybe it lingers a little long, but that's what these kinds of stories do, and like I love just like getting these breadcrumbs that eventually build into this like insane, massive, magic, really well realized magical world.
I'll keep it brief as well. I'm gonna go with the book. I think season 1, it was no contest really. It was obviously the book was better. Here I had a moment where I thought like, there's some things I liked in the show where I thought it was kind of an improvement. And gosh, Lanfear and that dress and the dream world, that earns a lot of points for me. But ultimately, it's hard to top the actual source. And I will give it to Robert Jordan here. But overall, man, this has been a really fun coverage. It's great to get to epic fantasy. That's not something we get to cover a lot on this show because there's just not a lot of adaptations of it. I'm excited about a future season, down the road. I hope we get to come back to it for that. That'll be the plan. If you wanted to buy any of these books, by the way, the Wheel of Time books, I have them all on our bookshop, which is always linked in the show notes. And if you buy them through the bookshop, we actually get like a little piece of it, and you help our show. And stick around to the end of this episode where we're going to announce our next coverage because we're going to tackle another show.
And if you wanted to support the podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film. And you can support on there for as little as $2 a month. There's many different tiers, but basically for the $2 tier, you can get our bonus content that we put out monthly. And then also higher tiers will get you things like t-shirts and mugs. And so check that out if you're interested.
Another way that won't cost you any money that you could help the show out is leave us a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. Or if you're on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and, maybe ring that little bell and turn on notifications and all that stuff that YouTubers say. That does help the show. Comment, honestly, giving us comments helps us, first off, engage with you, talk to you. We like to do that, but also boost us in the algorithm. So we're all trying to please the great algorithm these days.
Yeah, and be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink2Film. We're also on TikTok and quite a few other places, so look for us there. And also thank you to Serious Beat for the track The Chosen, which serves as our intro and outro music.
All right, real quick here at the end, we're going to announce our next project. We are actually off next week. We'll be releasing a From the Vault episode. But then when we're coming back, we're going to do our Halloween project. And we thought it would be appropriate to get into Edgar Allan Poe. We will be diving into a lot of his most famous works. We're going to do some research and figure out which ones are confirmed to be adapted in the show that is going to be corresponding with it, which is The Fall of the House of Usher, the latest Mike Flanagan adaptation coming to Netflix very soon. And we'll be dividing that up, I think, into 2 parts, much like we did with Wheel of Time here in the show. So look forward to that as our next big project. I'm really excited about it. Really, really pumped to get into Edgar Allan Poe, which is just such a legend in horror and somebody that we haven't been able to get into yet.
Yeah, totally. I love Poe's work too, especially when I was a teenager. I read the hell out of some Edgar Allan Poe, and I'll be excited to return to it. And I like Mike Flanagan's work a lot so far, so it'll be, 3rd time I think we've covered some of the material. So
Yeah, totally. Thank you for coming along this epic journey with us, and until next time,
keep adapting.